In this clip, we're going to take a look at absolute, relative, and mixed cell addresses. I've got a spreadsheet here where I've just entered in some numbers, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, and so on, and then we just multiply this by 2. So what I did is I had a starting point, 10, typed in a formula equals the previous cell plus 5, and then just copy that down to the next bunch of cells. And notice as I copy that formula, it uses what's referred to as a relative cell address. In other words, in cell A2, it's taking the contents of the cell that's one above it. In other words, cell A1, adding 5 to it and giving you the results. When I copy it down to the next cell below it, the spreadsheet doesn't really think that it's cell A2. It just thinks that it's a cell that's one above it, which happens to be A2. Adds 5 to it and gives you the results. Same thing as I copy this down, 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 down. It's always taking the previous cell, the cell that's one up above it, and adding 5 to that amount. So what's kind of great about it is if I change the starting amount to say 7, it just automatically changes my table to 12, 17. It's always adding 5 to the previous cell. So let's go back to 10. Same thing to the right of that cell. I typed in a formula equals the previous cell, A1 times 2, and then when I copy that to the right and down, 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 it's always going to use the relative cell position. It's always going to take the cell immediately to the left of it, multiply it times 2, and give you the results. So hence that's why I see 40, that's why I see 80. It's taking 40 times 2. It's taking 80 times 2, which is 160, and so on all the way through my table. I'll hit enter to paste this. Down at the bottom you can see it says select the destination and press enter or choose paste. Hit enter, and there's my formulas. All right, so that's what's known as what's using the relative cell address. So here's another example of showing how this works. In cell B13, I just typed in a simple formula, a reference to cell A1. Hit enter and I get 10. Now if I copy that down here, I should get the reference to the cell that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 up, and 1 to the left. So if I come down to this cell and count up 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 1 to the left, I should get a 15. In other words, equals cell A2. So if I copy this formula, Control C, paste it down here, hit enter, sure enough I get equals A2, and it's given me that relative cell position. So if we copy that one cell to the right, it will give me the contents of the cell that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 up, and just this 1 to the left, in other words cell, or the value 20, or B2. So let's copy that formula, Control C, paste it here, sure enough we get 20, or in other words cell B1. So if I take this formula, copy it down and over to the right, it's always going to refer to the cell that's 12 up, 1 to the left. All right, there's another way of typing in this formula. We can type in an equal sign, and I'll type in A1, then I'm going to hit my function and F4 key. And when I do that, I get a $sign in front of the A and a $sign in front of the 1. Now, granted, you didn't have to hit function F4, and the way it's set up on your keyboard might differ slightly. You can also just type that in with $signs. You can type in the $sign and hit enter, and I get the same amount, equals 10, or in other words equals the contents of cell A1. However, when I copy this, the column A is always going to remain absolute. In other words, wherever I copy it, it's always going to refer to column A. The row also has a $sign in front of it, the number 1. It means wherever I copy this, it's always going to refer to cell A1. So when I copy it here, it's still going to be A1, 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 everywhere on this table. So let's copy it. Cursor down, down, down to select just like we did before. Over, 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 to the right. Hit enter, and notice in every single one of these cells I always get the reference to 10, in other words to cell A1. So that's what's known as an absolute cell address. Alright, there's two more forms of this. Both of these are what I refer to as mixed cell addresses. So in this one, we've got a dollar sign between the column and the row. So in this case, it means that the column can change, but the row doesn't. So when I copy this down, it's still going to be 10. But when I copy this to the right, it's going to change the column to be B1, 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 C1, C1, C1. So I'll always refer to what's in A1, B1, C1, and D1. So I should get 10, 20, 40, and 80 all the way through my table. So let's give that a try. And if I type in equals A1, hit my function F4 key once, twice, that's where I get the dollar sign between the A and the 1. Or again, just simply type it in, $1. Hit enter, copy, down, 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 right, 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 hit enter, and every time it always refers to row number 1. And as I'm cursoring through it, notice up on the formula bar it's still 1, 1, 1, but the columns did change. So here it's D, here it's E, there it's F. So my last case is where the dollar sign is in front of the A1. So I'll just to show you, equals A1, hold my function key, hit the F4 key once, twice, 3 times. If you hit it once too many, it goes back to the original case. So you can just kind of toggle through this and switch it through until finally you get a dollar sign in front of the A, not in front of the 1. So that way it's always going to refer to column A. The 1 can change depending on which row we happen to be in. Hit Control C, down, 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 right, 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 right. And there's the results of my formula. So notice as we scroll through these cells, you know, here it's A2, A3, A4, but in the cell to the right of it, it's still column A, 2, 3, 4. Column A, 2, 3, 4. So that's the overall concept. All right, the only time that we have to worry about that is when we're copying cells. So hence that's why I named the sheet. Just worry about this when you're copying cells or copying a formula like this. So we've got relative, absolute, and 2 forms of mixed references. So now let's try a practical application of this. In this spreadsheet, I've got an input area. I've got the starting mileage on my car, the ending mileage of it, the gallons that it took to fill, and then the cost to fill that up. So these 4 cells, I'm going to highlight these with some yellow. That's my input values. So if I change any of them, you know, say that we change this to, I don't know, 75,000 and this to something else, my results of the rest of the spreadsheet will change. So the first output that I want to do is I want to get the miles driven. So the miles driven is just equal to the ending miles minus the starting miles, 314 miles. So again, let's just try a quick change. Make this 75,000 and we'll try 75,400, and my miles driven is 400 miles. Alright, so let's go back, just undo those. So we're back to the 69.3, just to kind of show you that. The cost per gallon is going to equal the cost to fill my car divided by the number of gallons. So that's showing up as 3.09. If I increase the decimals a little bit, it's actually a little bit more than 3.09. We'll leave it we'll leave it with 3 decimal points, so it just shows that it's $3 9 cents and 4 tenths, if you will. The miles per gallon is going to equal the total miles driven divided by the gallons used to fill up my vehicle. So I'm averaging 30.2 miles per gallon. And again, I could increase the decimals if I really chose to, but probably just rounding this off to 1 decimal place is fine. And then the last calculation that I did is I took the total cost to fill and divided that by the miles driven to get that it cost me about 10 cents. In other words, actually 10.25 cents to drive just 1 mile, in terms of that's how much gas that I'm burning on my car. Alright, so that's all kind of interesting. You know, I mean, I can, every time I fill up, I'll change the starting mileage, I'll change the ending mileage, gallons to fill, cost to fill, do my recalculations and find out what it is. Or I suppose I probably could have just simplified this, and instead of having a starting mileage and an ending mileage, I could have just put in my odometer and entered it in that way. But just different ways. So now what I want to do is I want to set up a table where I want to know how much does it cost me to drive 100 miles if gas costs $2.50. Then I'd like to know what would it cost to drive 200 miles at that, 300, 400, 500, and so on, up to 1,000 miles. How much is it going to cost me in terms of if I'm getting 30.2 miles per gallon, and if the cost of gas is $2.50. So what I did is I'll type in equals A7 divided by the miles per gallon. That should tell me how many gallons of gas I'm using. So if I just show that with a comma, it would take me 3.31 gallons to drive 100 miles if I can average 30.2 miles per gallon. Now I want to take that and multiply it by $2.50. And it will cost me $8.28 if gas is $2.50 a gallon. So now I want to know what's going to happen if it was $3 a gallon. So I could take my 100 miles, divide it by the miles per gallon. That should give me the number of gallons, roughly 3 gallons. And I'll multiply that by my $3 per gallon. Let's format that with a dollar sign, and it's almost $10. It's $9.94. Let's try it for 350. Equals 100 divided by miles per gallon times 350. Format that with a dollar sign. $11.59. And I could fill that formula out for all the rest of these cells. The only problem is it's kind of tedious to do it for this kind of a table. So instead, let's just try to copy this. Copy my formula, copy it down, 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 right, 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 hit enter, and I get a mess. All right, the reason we're getting the mess is when I copied it, A7, when I copied that down, that became A8, which is 200 miles. So actually that A7 is fine. I wanted it to become A8. I want it to become A9. I want it to become A10 and so on. But the problem is the denominator, A3, which is my miles per gallon, became cell E4. And below that it becomes E5, which is blank, hence that's why I'm getting a division by 0. So what I want to do is I always want to use row 3. I always want to refer to this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a dollar sign between the E and the 3. And let's try this. Let's copy it. Down, 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 right, 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 right. Hit enter, and we came a little bit closer. At least I'm getting some numbers here. But let's take a look at what happened with the formula again. All right, For here, I've got A8, 200, divided by E3, that gives me the number of gallons, but then it's multiplying this by cell B7, which is 828. I want it to multiply it by B6. So let's change this and put a $sign in front of the 6. So that way it'll lock that row in place. Let's try to copy it again. Down, 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 down. Right, 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 right. Hit enter, and looks a bit more promising. 828. 1656. Let's see. 200 divided by 30 is going to be roughly 6 gallons of gas times 250. That looks about right. And another easy way of doing it is saying 828 times 2, because I've went from 100 miles to 200 miles, doubles the cost of my trip. So for the first column, this is working correctly. For the second column, it's not quite working correctly, because again, if I look at my formula, it's taking B7, which I want to use A7. It's taking F3, which is over here, which is a blank cell, and hence I'm getting a 0. It's taking C$6, which is my $3, so that's correct. The B7 isn't correct. The F3 is not quite correct. C6 is. So let's go back. Let's change our formula. I always want to use column A. So I'm going to put a $sign in front of the A. I always want to use this column. I want the row to change. I want 7 to become 8 when I copy that down. So I don't put a $sign here. I do want, no matter where I copy this, I always want to use cell E3. So I'm going to put a $sign in front of the E, so that way when I copy it to the right, it doesn't become F, G, and H. I want to put it in front of the 3, because if I copy this down, I don't want it to become 4, 5, and 6. I always want it to be E3. And then finally the last one, the B6, when I copy that to the right, I want it to change to C, but when I copy it down, I always want it to remain row 6. So here we've got an example where I have a mixed reference on the numerator, an absolute reference on the denominator, and another form of the mixed reference in my multiplication. So when I typed it in, I'll hit Control C to copy it, down, 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 right, 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 hit enter, and my table's done. So if I want to know how much is it going to cost me if I drive 1,000 miles and gas is $5 a gallon, it's $1.65, or I'm sorry, $165 to drive 1,000 miles. All right, one last thing that we can do with my spreadsheet is this 250. I might want to change that, and same with this 100. I might want to change that starting point. So the starting point, I want to reference this cell up here, cell F1. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to type in an equal sign, reference cell F1, and hit enter. Now for the increment to be 200, I want to take the previous cell plus this increment in cell G1. However, now I'm going to copy this down, so I always want it to reference G1. So I can either put the $sign in front of both of them, or technically I really only need it in front of the 1, because if I copy it down, my column's not changing. It's just the row that I want to hold absolute. So I'm going to take that, copy it down to the rest of the cells. Do a similar thing with the starting point for the gallons of gas. I'm going to reference 250 here. Then for this one, I'll take the previous cell plus the increment in cell G2, but I always want to use column G. So I'll put a $sign in front of the G, then copy that, Control C, right, 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 hit enter, and now I've got a really flexible spreadsheet where we can change this and say, all right, let's try 500 miles as my starting point. Let's go in 250 mile increments, and my table changes. Let's say that gas is 2 1/4, and I want to know what it goes increments in terms of if it went up by a quarter each time, and we can plug in the numbers that way. So there's an example of how you can use absolute, relative, and mixed cell addresses. We'll do this in more complex formulas shortly, but wanted to at least get you started with that.